So I've been looking forward to this, and it's my pleasure to introduce our poet tonight, who is sitting here to my right. Ralph is the winner of the 2012 River Teeth Literary Nonfiction Prize for his memoir, So Far, So Good, and winner of a Rockefeller Bellagio Award. His 3 books of fiction and 11 books of poems evoke his Cherokee, Swanee, Irish, English, American heritage. He's presented his work on stage, radio, TV in the U.S., Canada, Europe, and India. His poem in the Children's Museum in Nashville has attracted attention as a precursor to the contemporary Native American literary movement. In selecting his 2000 book Rainbows of Stone as an Oregon Book Award finalist, Maxine Kuhlman wrote, "Nature in Ralph Salisbury's conception is a presence to be addressed. His book deserves a broad audience." Recent books are like The Sun in Storm, Poems, Blind Pumper at the Well, The Indian Who Burned Berlin, Stories, Light from a Bullet Hole, and Poems New and Selected. So he will have books back here for sale and for autograph after the reading. He grew up hunting and trapping, laboring on a family farm, which had no electricity, running water, and was reachable only by a dirt road. Through Air Force service, he earned 6 years of university education and has devoted his life to writing, editing, translating, and teaching. His poems and fiction come from having lived as a questing, mixed-race, working-class individual in a violent world. And he says that his work is offered to the spirit of human goodness, which unites all people in the eternal struggle against evil, a struggle to prevail against global extinction. Ralph lives with his wife, who's right here to my left, in Grevent, and they live in Eugene. So would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Ralph Salisbury. Ralph.
I thought I would start my reading in the spirit of the prayer that Tom offered at the beginning. It's a poem titled Before 9/11 and Afterward. And I should say, as a prologue, that our daughter, who's in the poem and who was very close to the 2 towers when they went down, says that New Yorkers, and she among them, are a little sensitive, or a little possessive about the tragedy that happened to so many of them and many of their friends. So if that's your case here, I offer my solemn condolence right now. My way of dealing with this, as well as I could, is my usual way. I wind up writing a poem. And so I think the situation emerges in the poem. Some of you may not have been in Oregon very long, but you know we have the dubious distinction of having the only people killed on American soil in World War II. I mean, Hawaii is now a state, of course, that's since World War II. But, and you know, a Sunday school teacher and some of her students were killed by a Japanese fragmentation bomb. And I use the technical term just matter-of-factly because at that time I was on patrol over Oregon forests, and that emerges in the poem. This balloon is obviously one we did not intercept, and it killed this lady and her students. The other event is also unenviable item. A Japanese submarine cannonaded the Oregon coast at Astoria, and the coastal batteries fired back, but they didn't hit the submarine, and that's in the poem. But those two things are Oregon's close encounters with the Japanese forces in World War II. Okay, this is the poem before 9/11 and after, and it's dedicated to Ingrid's and my daughter, Martina. Oregon coastal cannon could not still one from a submarine, and a Sunday school class was sent to heaven because we machine gunners training to kill others who'd try to down our bombers had failed to see a Japanese balloon as it had descended bearing bombs intended to burn acres and acres of billions of dollars worth and centuries of trees whose great-grandparents were not even cones when a galleon, hold empty for gold, sailed further offshore than any spear could reach, and cannonaded villages which might have resisted invasion. As steadfast as those sacrificing lives to their conception of God, my countrymen are offering what syllables as beautiful as petals wilting have always said, and recalling Nazi firing squads, eliminating future sabotage, I take no satisfaction from Afghanistan's or Iraq's destruction. Instead, I hear the dead whose deaths I and millions of my generation intended, their bones blown, their homes blown into tombs, become the sorrowing tones of a friend. The conqueror's, our language, now his. At 17, a volunteer. At 25, a resistor. I lived by the words of orators. At 75, survivor of a heart attack and cancer, I heed the silence of thousands in my daughter's voice, phoning 3 miles from explosions to reassure her mother and me just after the World Trade Center went down. I think that you have this poem in the broadside that Tom spoke of. So it strikes me I might read it as my second poem. There have been many kinds of destruction, of course, and the destruction of a species is something we're starting to take notice of. And so there are 2 creatures that are headed for extinction in the poem, and one is in the title, Saving the Flet Violet, and the other is a species of Iowa prairie chicken which disappeared because of the American Depression, and people like me and my family stayed alive because these prairie chickens were slow and couldn't fly very well. They were easy to kill, and so we ate them. And after a time, they were all gone. So those two creatures are in the poem. And the title character is the flat violet. War words I obeyed as dead to me as those that incited Romans to invade. I learned that the flat violet would soon have been doomed by a mountain sheep's appetite, but our sister mammals been tranquilized and lies legs splayed as if for human birth, suspended beneath a helicopter to be moved and hunted by some who need dollars less than they need the thrill of killing. I watch a scarce creatures being sacrificed to save one scarcer. My concern not to miss footholds in stone as I descend into an old volcano in a niche of which I see a solitary creature. Its petals, the phantom wings of a prairie chicken, depression, hunger of too many like me, ravened into extinction, destined to survive for a time, the hunger of another species. A war survived. I feel still meteors slashing black fur sky, explosions transformed in time to a mouthful of stars and a father's Milky Way bedtime storytelling tongue. Ingrid, would you like a drink of my tea? It's just under there. Yeah. 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 Well, see, it turns out poetry isn't the only thing Ingrid and I share. We recently hosted a virus, and I think I'm just about okay again in time for this reading. I'm happy to say. Well, Ingrid's very important to this reading because she's the mother of the young woman who appears in the first poem I read, but also she's the only one that knows where one of my books is that's got something I intend to read today. And at a certain point, you'll remember this when I call you to a task for me somewhere near the end of the reading. So I'm going to read from two books, and one is recently published by Milwaukie Kaduki, Habit of Rainy Nights Press here in Portland, and it's this book here, and on its cover is a photograph Ingrid's and my daughter took of the farm where I was born and where I lived until I was 17 and went into the Air Force. The other book is the one that's published by an Oregon press, also Light from a Bullet Hole, poems new and selected. And It's probably the best bargain in Milwaukie, Oregon, because I and Roger Moody, the editor of Silverfish Review Press, went over through all the books I published through all the years, and there were quite a few of them, and tried to pick the best ones to represent each book. So you get a whole bunch of books for the price of one in that case. Of course, being a poet, I feel what most of you who are poets probably feel, that any book at any price is a bargain. A lot of my poems are family poems, or about family incidents. And this is a poem called Wound Inflicted by Family Pet. It could easily bite the children's fingers off. Notches at tail of shell, a snapping turtle. I learned too late, having tried only one stick, the size of the baby's wrist, to test the intent of that torpid head I'd raised from half-dried muck at the farm where I had gone, where I had grown up, as they say, in the country, meaning nothing Darwinian or Christian. A time bomb drowsed in the sandbox in the suburb where a boy who had hunted shooting star flowers and chicks with ducks with dinosaur feet had come to reside, polite, no pain in his muscles from feeding animals, the only butchery, what steel turtles did on the long gray slab out front. Dogs and a kitten, the only victims so far. No castration shrieks, not even from the neighbor who hung up his wife's and daughter's undies and did a very nice barbecue. No pecking order patterns, no chickens, just children's stoning a 4-year-old stranger to remember, whenever less serious problems, gangs, humiliating one, universal city kids fun occasionally came up. Danger, by then the pet had bitten through hundreds of lettuce and celery cores, nothing more. But seeing the stump of my son's trigger finger pointing at me for the rest of my life, as playmates went to war, one day, beneath downy serpents, hatched high in the sky from silver-winged eggs, I took the turtle and a friend who hated his boss in a gentlemanly way and had a bad heart down to the river. I think most of us try to live as blamelessly as possible, but there are a certain amount of guilt we accumulate through our lives. And this is a poem about that, one of those guilts. Its title is Child Seller. Money to make, selling my home, muddying what is called my mind, real mud in the yard. I gaze out rain-washed windows at trees like Vietnamese peasants with pointed hats and fringed capes spread by the wind that fans blue smoke from hidden braziers, warming green wool draped limbs, and cooking delicacies to have with a mountain of blue sherbet. This lures back, briefly, the child I sold into slavery. Sold him, although or because this is the 20th century, ignorant, young, hungry, afraid of losing my glamorous woman, of being despised by the splendid men of the world. I sold him cheap, although he could raise intricate castles from plain spring mud. I think it's time for me to have some of the tea I offered Ingrid. Would you? Oh, thank you. Thanks very much. I think I've published as many what are called surrealist poems as anybody living on this earth. And I've always thought the surreal poems of Octavio Paz, the Mexican poet, were some of the finest things ever written on this planet. And this poem I'm going to read would qualify, I think, as a surreal poem. I should tell you that I'm American Indian, and with us, it's a little different than with other poets who have written in the surreal tradition. I mean, people like Vallejo, who was American Indian from Peru. Right? It's kind of a union of dream world and everyday world. And so it's not like French surrealism, where it's kind of more cerebral. It's more felt, and with the American Indian surrealists. So that's a rather ponderous way to introduce the poem. Sorry about that. I hope it somewhat lives up to it, the time. A God's life near. I have come home again from the white man's war, hero in dream as I never was when I only stepped off a train and was back. 20 again, I climbed to the room where I store my guns. I only want to know they are still there. I am not frightened. I do not feel fierce. Behind another door, a girl rises, naked, hair brushed into gleams like eyes in the dark forest. We dance out together, not touching, air warming between us, and encircled by splendor of moonlight on leaves, she ascends a stone centering our clearing. whose shadow and glowing prophesy descendants endless as wolf cries echoing. My own life as brief as meteor flash of a God's knife near horizon. And I, who have only risked death as myself till now, am afraid as I have not ever been. A great Canadian poet, Earl Burney, who won just about every prize you could win in Canada or Great Britain, and I became friends when he and I were guest professors at the University of Oregon, and he had a regular job in UBC in Canada, and I was looking for a job. They offered me one here, and here I am to this very day. I'm really happy about that. But anyway, one of the gifts from this great poet was it's the sense that it's all right to have something of a sense of humor. And so I dedicate this poem called Elephant Shoes in memory of Earl Burney. A good fight, inviting as a good road invites, a man, knuckles beginning to tingle, may, like his country, try a little travel. But I remember armored cars scattered like meteors torn off stars. Love, traditional poetry's rose petals tint, pitched, ditched, and staked against storm. Bare beauty swims science's lava up mountain, eager to be mine in my mind, but on reaching snow-quilted summit, dives to center the earth. And I, a far from idealizing man, I abide in a rented house, work 48 hours a week for someone I dislike, like many of you, and picnic in our public wishes, resenting your noise as you do mine. But when you shamble over to offer the the use of the fire you have made for hot dogs, or one of those obscure metaphors whose about weather nobody ever understands, I feel like crying so long our kids would have a salt lake to sail newsprint ships, the Hiroshima, the Nagasaki, half across. And if I do not cry, not daring to risk melting the ice all of us skate toward eventual summer, forgive me for being no better than you, a poet who will stumble and fall over a final syllable, though living for good moments which sometimes seem oftener and longer, sometimes not. Forgive me this early morning verse, sputtering like a power mower, almost out of gas, below your bedroom window, when you're maybe in the best dream of your whole life so far, or loving your wife, or feeling your own poem scampering into its den, ahead of the alarm clock's steel-edged bicuspids, and the god-awful elephant shoes of the usual things that you have to do. Oh, thanks. Yeah. It's the memoir. Yeah. This we have a good working arrangement. At least it's good for me. So, thank you, my dear. I think I want to read 2 or 3 poems from the new book of poems. And I think, thank you very much. Dwayne Ponce, the editor of Milwaukie Gaduhi, Habit of Rainy Nights Press, would probably approve of my decision. And the first poem I would like to read from the new ones is called Throne. Not like a king has, but like a ball is. Throne. Feet just like ice were my Cherokee, Shawnee, Grammys, English words, but children lost in the woods, woods lost to my other ancestors' money-making blades. What were they like to be lost in? Forebears of maples, I bled for sweetness at breakfast, centuries of growth joining hours of my own. What was it like to be lost among counselor wolves and ancestor bears and raven mocker witches shooting star wings, circling earth thrown by story-telling tongues from tombs, toes, icicle roots, day melts. A poem I read many times, and I may have read it to some of you before, but it is for the childhood of my 2 sons, Jeff and Brian. The giant, its title is Come Near the Western Edge, I Try, a Last Myth for the Childhood of My Sons. The giant is eating the mountain, I tell my children, while eating cereal with them. A gray mustache is working slowly down the last green slope before ours. It is a very large mountain, and mostly granite. It is very hard. It is much harder than limestone, which was formed from small shellfish under the sea in Iowa. Our old home under ocean? Yes, once upon a time, an ocean ate little Iowa. Back when there was Indians? Oh, my sons, it was not the ocean that ate the Indians. And it was not medicine men who made the ocean leave. Before I was a baby, before Iowa was a part of the United States, or even the state of mind in a settler, before words became language, long before Hiroshima dissolved like sugar in your cereal. Huh? Oh, my neighbors, I whisper because I fear huge ears and the tongue that may crush me and my 2 sons. Oh, my neighbors beyond the gray mustache through which a dying father speaks. Oh, my neighbors, the giant is eating very slowly just now. The mountain is hard. It is not easy eating. It must be difficult to live with an appetite huge as the clouds. Live well, my neighbors, living still, where all will be green a little longer. Man was made to eat. A little conversation is said to help digestions. Laugh to end with a reassuringly familiar phrase, make, and I am serious about this, make a good meal. Thank you. Thanks very much. I am about to do something kind of sneaky as a way of plugging my prize-winning book, which is not poetry at all. But on the other hand, I never have been able to tell the difference between poetry and prose. And some reviewers have referred to the poetic quality of this book. So I'm going to read something, and I'll call it a prose poem. And this is the epilogue. And so if you listen carefully to this, you won't have to buy the book. Simultaneity, access to one's entire life in any moment, to see or to feel the universe in a grain of sand, eternity in an hour, to live not by the calendar so useful in sentencing criminals. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which meant to my 21-year-old simple-mindedness about what it does to my 83-year-old simple-mindedness. That what went on for generations of adaptation goes on in each new child, and human embryo still have gills and tails in the womb. Dream recall, meditation, Dianetics. In 1951, yet another imperialist war killing thousands in Korea. A fellow university graduate student in Iowa City, Iowa, said, "I spent last night in my mother's womb." Time travel all the way back through the faunal scale to the beginning of life, science fiction, religion, simultaneity, fascists shooting at my brother as he escapes prisoner of war camp, while my brother is aiming a gun at my father and going to kill him if he doesn't stop abusing our mother, while someone is enduring a winter night to shoot the glass out of a window above my baby bed. Simultaneity, simple-mindedness, why not? Simultaneity, spontaneity, why not? What other word pattern is so sensible that it should preclude Rosetta Stone? Rose ate a stone. Spontaneity, simplicity, simultaneity. Our noble allies and comrades in arms in World War II, our evil empire enemies, the Russians, and hypnotic media propaganda deludes millions from perceiving the military-industrial takeover of the government, which President Eisenhower served for 8 years and then condemned. TV, the repetition of a few enslaving phrases until they become the American language. TV, on which you can't tell a mother from her daughter, ostensibly because expensive chemicals keep the mother looking so young, but possibly because the tyranny of always having to spend so much of her young life in trying to look like a machine-age courtesan makes the daughter look as lifeless as plastic derived from fossils. TV, in which you are told again and again slyly that what's good for those enslaving you is good for you. Fear words, you'll be playmateless, friendless, loverless if you don't have TV-approved toy, air balloon breakfast cereal, soft drink, harder drink, garment label, Russ music group label, shampoo, hair conditioner, soap, deodorant, watered, scientifically moisturized, so you will smell like fake flower chemicals. Not smell of animal sweat and secretions. Toothpaste decreed by actors in white laboratory smocks to polish to mating season luster. Enamel to frame enticing tongue. Framed by TV-approved lipsticked lips. Enamel that in name recognition restaurants tears apart meat. Pit bull dogs are maiming or killing your children. Happy dog food makes your dog happy and is easy on your family budget. Un-American, communism, socialism, Arab terrorists, Arab oil. An elderly person, no longer able to keep up with family and tribe, decides to rest, meditate, and starve beside the trail so that loved ones may survive and bring new generations into the world. For my aged self, this Christmas month, life has been a loving, significant, fun-filled reunion with children and grandchildren. I cannot imagine a post-nuclear ice age audience gasping, "Wow, this writer dude was utterly cool." It is, however, good to think that some fraction of my words might help some fraction of some population to live better, or might give solace in the human suffering all of us live. It is good to think of my words possibly being of use in the ongoing lives of my children and grandchildren. 1,000 or a mere 100 years from now, someone may stumble onto words of mine fallen off the splintered shelf of a maybe bomb-blasted library. I can think this moment when my memories of life are flowing onto a computer screen to evaporate into clouds and rain to fall or not. This moment when my death is at least the medically estimated 4 minutes for the next breath, it is good to think of my body's adding to the earth's scant supply of fertilizer. Why am I not out walking in the sunshine of my 83rd spring? A spring I would not be seeing out this or any other window had not medical skill progressed to the ability to transplant a blood vessel from my aging left leg to my aging heart. My heart, receiver of stolen goods, thriving. Leg still okay, like any living thing robbed of anything short of life. Why am I not out walking, not even stealing the beauty of others have labored to create in front yards? most will labor 1/3 approximately of their lives to own? Why are my feet and my mind not tagging along with my gaze and my mind into the reality of this day's, this instant's inexpressible splendor? My mind unites with the hand clutching this pen, same tool which bored clerks were busily recording their centuries' piracy's booty and inhumane worship of wealth. Glamorously, transcendentally mad, William Blake experienced the world in a grain of sand, eternity in an hour. As mad as Blake, whether gloriously and transcendentally so or not, I am trying to experience again and again at least some of my past in a computer chip and to translate it into ink in the hopes that others may experience a tiny piece of a time I would like to call mine. A time I try to save from those whose love of power threatens to destroy our childhoods, children, and render humans extinct. I hope to feel myself 15 again and again, and afraid of death and trembling and trying to do what a son and a man should be expected to do, defend his home. I hope to sense again and again the fragrance of fallen maple leaves, the bouquet of a stranger's perfume, an island of impossible dreams in an Arctic ocean of air, the brilliance of sun in daffodils, the daffodils I would give my wife, my complex, fascinating wife of 40 years, when tired and beautiful, unutterably beautiful, she returns from her workday, 8 hours of William Blake's eternity, unaware that I am trying to destine her to live the rest of her and William Blake's eternities in a computer chip, itself, so I understand, a grain of sand. She will suggest, I hope, a walk through sunlight, finding fulfillment in forsythia, seething like terribly beautiful and reassuringly distant lightning. Forsythia, a molten thunderbolt, hurtling towards sky and into two aging lovers' delighted eyes. So enough of this purple, poeticized prose. Somebody with a body still as young as a newly created poem may say, feeling hurtling youthful flesh passed by awed, admiring, aged eyes towards someplace else, no place else but bed. Forsythia, by God, I affirm, in my 83rd aging hours and hours of eternities. Forsythia, yes, by God, forsythia, by God, and by chance, or by hook, or by crook, or by a poet's warped way of looking at facts, but to God, whatever else, to God, to God, by God. And wild ducks, yes, rain or shine, raincoat or t-shirt, hundreds and hundreds of wild ducks, as numerous and varied I couldn't even begin to count the jewels. The force of their landing will scatter across water, shining like a silver planet. Yes, ducks, wild ducks, mallards, like the ones I'd go get soaked and shiver for hours to harvest from blue or gray sky for my family's often bare meat platter. Wild ducks, bless their beauty, their forgiving, fearless, and greedy, gabbling enjoyment of an life as intense as my hopefully equally forgiving own. Trumpeter swans, for sure, straight lines of black marked white flowers growing in a blue or a gray sky garden, and trumpeting, yes, creating a music, presumably about arduous effort and anticipation of food and of mating. Mating for life, I am told, for life, and whatever else each swan may feel about death and ongoing life is all I believe that Beethoven could express. And now, again and again, snow geese, a great, white, incredibly beautiful blizzard descending on the gray waters of the bay, a beautiful blizzard to these aging eyes, soon, too soon, to close, a blizzard, a beautiful reminder of winters gone and winters to come, and to melt again into forsythia blossoms under egg yolk color sun. Okay. Speaking of time, I think Tom told me to save some time for questions and discussions, so we still have all night, so I guess I have to say.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Ralph. And
Oh, thank you.
you and Ingrid are both poets. What's your writing schedule?
I'd have to say it's pretty varied, wouldn't you, Ingrid? Yeah.
It used to be more predictable, though. You used to get up, Ralph used to get up like 5 in the morning, write until
Yeah.
maybe 8 or 9,
Yeah.
10. When he was teaching, he would teach night classes so he could write in the morning.
Yeah, one of the first things they asked me when they hired me at the University of Oregon is, when would you like your classes? And before that, people always seemed to think my favorite time for class was 8 o'clock in the morning. And that went on for too many years. So I told them, night classes, and then I'll have the day free to write.
And I used to be a night writer. Now it's kind of reversed.
Yeah. Whatever works. So. I bet everybody here is a writer.
Where
Yes.
were you raised at? Where were you born and raised at?
Would you speak?
Where were you born and raised at? You said
Oh,
you were raised on a
about
farm.
on a farm about 60 miles west of the Mississippi River in Iowa. Yeah. My father was born in the hills of Kentucky, and as my standard autobiographical statement says, he only had 2 years of schooling. He was a mixed blood American Indian, very typical Appalachian Indian. And it was pretty primitive in my time. My cousins and I we if we could get the use of the mounts, the Morgan mare, which the Harold being the biggest always got, nice smooth riding horse, or Jackson the mule, which is named for a U.S. president who's not a hero to American Indians. And the mule is not my favorite mount either. But we go up a creek. There wasn't any road, and my granny still lived up the creek. Yeah. So then I joined the Army and learned about civilization.
Did you write as a child? Did you do any writing or dream about of writing of poetry or anything when you were?
Well, I was pretty busy for about a little more than 2 years, and I did a lot of reading though. You know, you take off with a big bomber, and there are about, well, it depends where you're going, but you know, got quite a bit of free time. So in those days we had big baggy pockets and the little books called pocket books. And so I read a lot that way. And you know, I'd read anything. I was a dumb farm kid. I didn't know anything. But thanks to some good Samaritans who were from the East Coast and were at least half educated by schools like Colgate, Harvard, you know, they had some advantages I didn't have. They were very generous, and spotting my whatever intelligence I displayed, they recommended books to me. And I first thought poetry was not just a sissy thing when a friend of mine who was a Golden Gloves boxing champion, I mean, he was a real fighting machine, Harold Wells. And so anyways, he would loan me books of poetry. And then I realized that my father had been singing poetry all during my childhood. The ballads, the storytelling poems. So it was a fortunate childhood. They hadn't invented TV yet, so I didn't even have to defend myself against that.
Well, if there are any more questions?
I just want to ask you, when you were a child, growing up on the farm there, what was your little local schoolhouse like? Was it one of those where there were about 8 grades in it in one little house?
Yeah, it was about this. The one-room school was a little smaller than this room, and it was. But I will also say this, and educators have said this too, that the young women who are our teachers there'd be one young woman teaching 8 grades. But I will say this, they loved us, and we were just as happy as could be. Yeah. They were good teachers.
Well, thank you very much, Ralph. So Ralph will be here. There are books back here. There's some tea. There's some cookies. So please have some tea and cookies. Wendy Willis is going to be here in October on the 9th. So thank you both for being here. Let's give Ralph